They became a smash hit as half of 10cc invented a Gizmo, were early innovators of the music video, and released several unique and witty studio albums together. My name is Sean, and today I'm telling the story of Godley and Creme.
Sean's Music Hunt.
Kevin Godley was born October 7th, 1945, and a couple of years later, in his hometown of Prestwich, Lancashire, England, Lowell Creme was born on September 19th, 1947. The two met in the late 50s, attended art schools majoring in graphic design, and collaborated in multiple ways in music and video projects when they were young. Lowell Creme joined a rhythm and blues band called the Sabres as a guitarist, and Kevin Godley soon joined on the drums, though they were only in the band for a short time. Through that experience, they met fellow future 10cc member Graham Gouldman, who they collaborated with in many ways over the years, and Godley played with in the Mockingbirds. Already successful at selling his own compositions, Gouldman repolished one of Godley and Creme's film score songs, and it became a hit for Wayne Fontana in 1966. A couple of years later, Godley and Creme would officially release a single together under the name the Yellow Bellow Room Boom, and since they didn't actually have a full band, the label did some promotional material with a band of impersonators. The psychedelic folk single didn't exactly launch them to instant stardom, but it did show off their talents and Kevin Godley's beautiful voice. After contributing to a sampler album and recording another single that wasn't released at the time, they were eventually recording a full-length album for Marmalade Records at Strawberry Studios with the help of Eric Stewart and Graham Gouldman. Unfortunately, not long after releasing a single from the upcoming album under the name Frabjoy and Runcible Spoon in September 1969, Marmalade Records collapsed, and the Frabjoy and Runcible Spoon album was shelved for over 50 years, finally being released in June of 2022 as part of a compilation called Frabjoyous Days, The Secret World of Godley and Creme, 1967 to 1969. In my video about 10cc, I talk about how the lads got tons of studio experience working with all kinds of different musicians and projects at Strawberry Studios. While Graham Gouldman was out working in the US, Eric Stewart, along with Godley and Creme, created an experiment in the studio with some new toys that had been brought in, which they called Neanderthal Man. It was released under the name Hotlegs and did rather well in several countries. An album and a tour with help from Graham would follow, and that would evolve into 10cc. These four incredibly talented singer-songwriters created four excellent art rock albums together, in which they all played different instruments, experimented with production techniques, and sang different lead and harmony sections with wonderfully clever and witty lyrics. If you'd like to learn more about that, please check out my video on 10cc, and if you're enjoying this video so far, please click the like button and consider subscribing for more. Now we're going to get into the stuff that I'm really passionate about, and this is what I'm actually going to talk about today. Back in 1969, Godley and Creme started working on a device called the Gizmo, which was meant to replicate the sound of a violin or a cello, or whatever else you could come up with, using spinning wheels that come down on whatever string, or however many strings you choose to vibrate. They say the idea came about to save costs in the studio, but I think in reality it's because Lowell Creme was always joking about how he wanted an orchestra for his birthday, and now finally he had one in his hand. They initially experimented with Godley using a drill with some kind of piece of rubber on the end. I don't know what they used, but I just put some kind of earplug on here. I'm going to try it out for the first time, but I think Lowell was probably pushing his finger down, and Godley... What am I doing? They later took the idea to the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, where eventually John McConnell would be the one to help them with a new prototype. By 1976, the duo had used the device several times in 10cc and were looking to capitalize on the invention and bring it to market alongside an EP that would show off its capabilities. This passion project was taking so much time and energy that they decided they needed to quit their band in order to devote themselves fully to it. After making plans to eventually release it under the name Gizmotron by a company called Musitronics, their planned EP would mix with another idea that had been brewing in their minds and became a triple album with a radio drama in the middle that also had songs interspersed throughout that.
Such a technological advance in the hands and imaginations of these two musicians not unnaturally produced music of earth-shattering proportions.
Consequences was recorded over a period of 18 months, in which Godley and Creme basically had blinders on to the outside world as they got stoned and focused all their energy on experimenting with the Gizmo, engineer Martin Lawrence, and other eventual collaborators. Kevin Godley became the lead singer of the duo, and of course the percussionist, and Lowell Creme would play all types of pianos and guitars, including bass. They had originally wanted an all-star cast to perform the radio drama, but when comedian Peter Cook joined the project, it was clear that not only could he write the production, but he could perform all of the male voices with plenty of variety. When the massive album was released in October of 1977, it had a hefty price tag in comparison to a normal-sized album. Combine that with how unusual this album is, and it was a major flop. But, though of course they would have enjoyed it being a bigger success, Kevin and Lowell were happy to get it out of their system and create such a huge piece of art. The first disc is largely instrumental, with some of it being entirely created by Gizmotron, along with studio effects or Gizmo with drums, and sometimes alongside other instruments or studio experimentation. The music on this disc is very progressive, and often blends together from track to track, while intending to recreate the scenes of weather destruction that tell the more worldwide perspective of this album's storyline. The second disc, or the third side to this album, begins with an actual song, a gorgeous piano-based song that reminds us that we are listening to two guys that used to be in 10cc. After this is when the radio drama begins. We meet two divorce attorneys and their clients and learn that there is a hole in the floor that attaches to the attic of a peculiar pianist named Mr. Blint. In the end, the matter of how many teeth Lulu has is of no consequence, while the world is being ravaged by apocalyptic weather. Sides 3, 4, and 5 consist of this comical play with some really great songs in between sections of dialogue that help add context and flavor to what is happening in the radio drama. Some of the dialogue has musical accompaniment, like some oohs and ahs and Gizmotron in the background, but not a whole lot of the time. When we finally get to the sixth and final side of the album, it is Mr. Blint's 17-movement symphony intended to restore the world to order. This epic 14-minute track has some callbacks to themes heard earlier in the album and is loaded with great sounds and melodies on the Gizmotron, often accompanied by drums or piano. This album got some really bad reviews when it came out, killing any potential for success at its high price point. But many that purchased the album back in the day probably still consider it a masterpiece to this day. I'm personally kind of in the middle, though I would like to believe it's a masterpiece. I just can't see myself listening to the full radio drama that often in comparison to basically any of the music. Of course, there's way too many things about this album to just sit here talking about all day, but a couple of the interesting things that they did in the studio were shovel sand to create the burial scene. They dropped plasticine in buckets of water for the flood. They got the Gizmo to sound like a saxophone through a lot of warping of the sound, and there's a lot more. Outside of the flood and some of the other best instrumental parts, a few highlights from this album are the songs on the third side. 5 o'clock in the morning, When Things Go Wrong featuring Mel Collins on sax, and Lost Weekend, which features legendary jazz singer Sarah Vaughan. The final thing I want to mention about Consequences for now is that Godley and Creme, with their art school background, also created all of the album's visual artwork through interesting experimental methods that included cotton wool for clouds and glass for waves.
Consequences. Will music ever be the same again?
After the flop of Consequences, Mercury Records understandably wanted the lads to go back in the studio and make something a little bit more commercial that they could actually sell this time. The duo lied and said that they had a bunch of songs ready when they actually had no idea what they were going to do next. By this time, they were already pretty much used to just writing and recording on the spot, so they went into the studio, came up with some kind of distorted bass drum sound, and started adding layers on top of it. At first it felt anticlimactic to be working on any project outside of the big passion project that was Consequences. But once they got going and started figuring out what they were doing, they were enjoying themselves more and more as they crafted what is really one of my favorite art rocky, art pop, avant-garde, progressive, strange Godley and Creme album of all time, L. As they always did, they were pushing themselves to learn new things and try new things all the time, and when Kevin Godley took a day off, Lowell Creme actually stepped up and played some drums, and vice versa. One day Kevin Godley got to play bass, and he plays the bass on the song Group Life, and it makes you wonder why he didn't play more bass, really. Godley also played a fair amount of xylophone. This next album, L, was released in August of 1978 and has a cover similar to a sign used on vehicles to designate that it is a beginner or learner driver. This album is less than 35 minutes in length, which seems tiny after Consequences. Godley and Creme returned to an art pop, art rock type of sensibility, but each song is very different and it is hard to place exactly what genre these guys are. The first track is long and super progressive, with lots of really unexpected changes. The subject matter is sensitive, but as Godley and Creme do with most of their tracks that deal with a serious subject, they use their witty lyrics and eccentric instrumentation to simply make it extremely entertaining as well as easier to approach. I really love the odd and humorous seduction in Sandwiches of You, and the song about a kid getting bullied, Punch Bag. They also sing about working in the hit factory that is the music business, art school, and life in 10cc. Though the majority of the album was created by the duo, there are a couple of sax players, including Andy McKay from Roxy Music, and radio broadcaster Paul Gambaccini plays a role called Bad Samaritan, which reminds me of the Central Scrutinizer from Joe's Garage, but this album predates that. I'm certainly not saying that Zappa stole the idea from these guys. Godley and Creme obviously were extremely inspired by Zappa, and you can hear that on this album through the music, as well as the lyric where they literally say, "getting into Zappa" in Art School Canteen. 1979 saw the creation and release of their third album, Freeze Frame, as well as their first music video, which we'll get into in a minute. The album came out in November of 1979, and has some similarities to the previous LP in a sense, but as usual, the duo tries new ideas with every song, and none of them are near the same experience. Guest stars on this release include Phil Manzanera, who helped produce and perform on a few of the tracks. Paul McCartney adds some backing vocals to the slow, psychedelic, and gizmo-heavy Get Well Soon, and Rico Rodriguez plays trumpet and tuba on An Englishman in New York. One of the most notable tracks on this album is I Pity Inanimate Objects, in which someone had brought an early harmonizer into the studio, a type of device that is similar to auto-tune, where it would pitch correct, and you could play the pitches on some type of keyboard. And so what they did is Kevin Godley sang the entire song monotone, while Lowell Creme played with the harmonizer and made him sing really crazy, robotic melodies that go extremely high and extremely low, and it's just really spontaneous and crazy to kind of reflect how he's singing about what does an inanimate object think. And how does the room feel about it? The B-side to the single from this album, Silent Running, is a hidden track in the middle of the Netherlands version of this album, though it doesn't appear on any other version. The A-side to that single, of course, was the bizarre track called An Englishman in New York, and did fairly well in several countries. It contains lots of strange lyrics inspired by how absurd they thought New York was during their first trip there, and is heavy in marimba, trumpet, and tuba, with thumping bass and repetitive clapping and fast hi-hat. The duo approached the record label with an idea for a film to go along with the single, and the record label approved of it, but gave them a director to work with. At first, the two were simply performers on set, But as the day went on, they basically started running the show with the director Derek Burbage just kind of helping them and giving them pointers. They wanted to be there for the editing process as well, and it was dawning on them that this was the next thing that they could do, the next way that they could push themselves while combining their art school background with their music background. Throughout the 80s, not only did they always direct their own music videos, but they became very sought after A-list directors in the growing world of music videos before the dawn of MTV and during its first several years. They worked with tons of acts during the 80s, including The Police, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Yes, Rush, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Toyah, Asia, Peter Gabriel, Duran Duran, Elton John, 10cc, and many more. One of the videos they directed for Herbie Hancock, Rocket, won 5 MTV Video Music Awards and won 2 Billboard Video Music Awards in 1984. And their competition that year wasn't exactly forgettable.
I'd like to say that Kevin and I thank everybody here, and especially MTV, for making it all possible for us. And they've started a whole new industry for people like us. Thank you.
Thank you, MTV.
A year later at the MTV VMAs, Kevin Godley was already openly expressing his distaste for the music video industry, as it was already becoming like his song Hit Factory.
The videos are all starting to look the same. I watched them and I'm seeing a factory production line. That's money talking, easy money. It's safe, it's expedient, but it's not exciting.
Bands and singers would come to Godley and Creme to request a music video, and they would look at the budget, the filming schedule, and consider if they could visualize what they were hearing in the song. Wanting to do something new and different every time meant that it was hard to label them in one particular style. But a common idea is that they didn't have much interest in representing the lyrics of a song because they feel that part of the art is already getting across. So they would be more inspired by the sound, and they would try to pair that with imagery. I believe the video that they made for Wang Chung was banned by the BBC so that it didn't potentially give people seizures. If you're enjoying this video so far, please just give it a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I put a lot of work into this, and I bought a Gizmotron, and I will never regret that. Meanwhile, though you couldn't quite consider the product perfect, an offshoot of the company Musatronics brought the Gizmotron to market in 1979. Led Zeppelin, Susie and the Banshees, and The Church were among the groups to release at least one song featuring Gizmo. Paul McCartney, who appeared on Freeze Frame, also used the Gizmo a couple of times, but back before it was released to the public. He used it on I'm Crying from 1978's London Town, and it seems to be unclear if whether it was Paul or Lowell who played on the track Liverpool Lou, released by Paul's brother's band, The Scaffold. Unfortunately, even the new Gizmotron is really finicky and hard to get perfect, and I'm sure the old one was even worse, and apparently they would fall apart very easily, and they basically all broke over time. The Gizmo had faded from public view pretty quickly, and after a couple of unfortunate happenings within the company, they stopped being produced in 1981. It wouldn't be until 2016 that a new company, Gizmotron LLC, released the Gizmotron 2.0 with Kevin Godley's approval. Released with a different cover and the title Snack Attack in the US, October of 1981 would see the release of Ismism, although it had been recorded more than a year beforehand. Though there are still some progressive and avant elements here, we're starting to hear the addition of drum machines, more new wave elements, and more repetitive backing tracks. I personally like a lot of drastic change-ups in my music, which is why I flocked to 10cc to begin with. And so these songs that feel more like 5 to 7 minute drum beats with maybe some sax solos and really interesting vocals, sometimes even rappy. It's just not exactly my style, but it's still really good, and I think a lot of people still really enjoyed Ismism. The album contains their highest charting UK single, Under Your Thumb, which is a haunting synth and drum machine heavy track that was referred to as being a sinister tale of a man encountering a woman's tortured soul. The other single from this album, Wedding Bells, also did fairly well. Again, I'm not entirely impressed musically by this kind of typical soul pop sounding song, but the lyrics about window shopping and wanting to avoid those wedding bells are pretty common. Their next album, Birds of Prey, was released in April of 1983. And suddenly Godley isn't playing the drums anymore and he's replaced by a drum machine. I think the last song on the album, Out in the Cold, is really creepy and interesting, and is probably the only song that I truly ever really want to come back to. Although I do find some of the other lyrical themes really amusing, especially My Body the Car. This album and its singles failed to chart, but you may enjoy checking them out. Samson and Save a Mountain for Me, which had a fairly amusing music video. Beginning with the ending dialogue from Consequences, Godley and Creme's sixth album, History Mix Volume 1, was released in 1985. It's a celebration of 25 years making music together. They took recordings from different eras of their life and stuck it into a blender, then, as Lil Cream stated, got JJ Jexelik of Art of Noise to reprogram the sounds to a disco beat so we could dance at our party. The highlight of this album, though, is when you're basically listening to the bridge of I'm Not in Love, Big Boys Don't Cry, Big Boys Don't Cry. And when you're anticipating for them to come in with the final verse, suddenly things change up and we are in a new song, or actually kind of the remixed beginnings of it on the full album version. But it became their biggest hit, 1985's Cry, and oh man, is that a great song. The music video is possibly the most recognizable thing labeled under the name Godley and Creme, and its experimentation led to Michael Jackson expanding the idea with his much bigger budgets. Included on a 1988 10cc and Godley and Creme video compilation, the guys had similarly remixed video to go along with basically the first half of this album, including the video for Cry. So you'll suddenly see Yes and Sting hanging out inside of a Herbie Hancock music video? Like why not? In January of 1986, the duo created a 3-part experiment called Mondo Video that comes out to being about 17 minutes long. And I never thought watching someone smoke in a studio could be more fascinating. They figured that every time you film a shot, you're going to create a sound, especially with something like a music video. And so what they did is they came up with video ideas, and after filming the video, that would give them sound, and they compiled things to make music, or I'm sure video wrote music and music wrote video to complete this very interesting project. Godley and Creme made plenty of TV appearances, but they never actually played live, as typically they used the studio as their instrument. But by 1988, the two were considering achieving a live sound again for their first time in over 10 years. When they were auditioning harmonica players, they realized that there was more to the instrument with a lot of different types of harmonicas. Typically, the instrument is used as a solo instrument, and they decided they could try doing something different with a whole rhythm section of harmonicas. And so their next album features 2 harmonica players in the studio, though their TV performances had 3 harmonica players, along with the 3 backing vocalists that they also hired. Needless to say, 1988's Goodbye Blue Sky is another oddity in music history, and not one that is guaranteed to please every listener. There's nothing particularly bad about this album, but by this point I'm just like, wait, how far have we gotten now since the thing that actually interested me in this band in the first place? Like, my gosh, we heard rap, and there's disco, and there's so many dancey beats, and all these things that typically I'm not drawn to. I'm not afraid of it. I'll partake at times, but it's just not my forte. And I was looking for progressive rock, art pop, 10cc, expanding on 10cc. That's like where I thought we were. Sorry, now I'm just rambling, but where did we go? As you can imagine, maybe these two were feeling kind of the same way. They'd been working together for almost 30 years, and unfortunately, their dreams of making a big screen movie together weren't working out. And I think that's one of the reasons why they ended up deciding that they had worked together long enough, and it was time to hang out with other people, do new things, and that's the last project that Godley and Creme ever made together.
Is there anything you haven't done before that you would like to do?
Our movie. A movie?
A movie is the only thing we haven't done before, but we're going to do that in June.
Outside of other projects, Lil Cream did end up making a feature-length film, a Jamaican comedy in the early 90s. It's called The Lunatic, and from the little bits that I saw, it's really funny and really ridiculous, and I think you can find it on YouTube or Vimeo. He later went on to play with Trevor Horn and JJ Jexelic's band Art of Noise. When not continuing to direct music videos, Kevin Godley has done so many other interesting things over the years that it may be worthy of a short video on its own. One of his most notable projects being One World, One Voice in 1990, in which he was able to get musicians from all over the world to collaborate on one epic piece of music with video in order to raise awareness of environmental issues. This idea was followed up by an iPad app that was meant to allow people to collaborate from all over the world. He released an album with Graham Gouldman in 2006, and more recently he has an album called Muscle Memory from 2020, and I've been listening to it and enjoying it very much. If you haven't seen it, I'd appreciate it if you watch my video on 10cc after this, or you can discover deeper into my channel to find something new that you haven't heard of. I appreciate you watching and hope very much that you will give the video a like, consider subscribing, and leave a comment telling me your experiences with Godley and Creme, or telling me about another band or musician that I should do a video in this style for. Until I see you again, or whatever this is, have a happy listening session.